The sovereignty of God. Job 32 through 37, what we'll be looking at today. In Isaiah 42, verse 8, you read the words that I am the Lord, that is my name. Well, in chapter 32, we have another individual that shows up to speak. He's been there listening to the other three, to Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. We haven't talked about Zophar to this point. In the first three verses we read, so these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite of the family of Ram, burned with anger. He burned with anger at Job because he justified himself rather than God. He burned with anger also at Job's three friends because they had found no answer, although they did declare him to be in the wrong. And as you read that chapter, you see a lot of anger in the words that are being displayed by Mr. Elihu. And it should be a reminder to all of us whenever we're counseling anyone similar to Job in a situation like he is in. Anyone. And that is, don't show anger. Don't show any anger. But now, as always, commentators are divided in their opinions on what Elihu has to say. But he really doesn't say anything new. It's much of the same old stuff. He goes down the same trail. And the same repetition that suffering is reaping what you sow. No more and no less. Now, we know that it is true. What you do when you do something totally equivocally wrong, you're going to reap its consequences. But not always, as in the case with Job, for what he hasn't done really. And many times with many of you, us, you just bear the burden of someone else's. So Elijah begins pretty good. He begins well, but he goes back to what the other three were saying. And chapters 32 through 37 contain 4 speeches from Elijah. And it's really a summary of what he contributes to Job's problems. Now there's a key verse, and you'll find that in chapter 34, verse 12. And that is that God will not do wickedly, and the Almighty will not pervert justice. So whatever answer you've got to pain and suffering, it can't be at the expense of the character of God, His integrity, and His justice. God is not going to bend the rules of the universe. He's not going to bend His ways just to comply with Job's particular situation. And for that matter, to comply with anybody's particular situation that they may be in. Job has to fit into the character of God. Likewise, we too must fit into the character of God, not God adjust himself to fit into Job's character or our character. And this is an uncompromised truth. It can't be changed. It cannot be altered. God cannot and will not do wickedly. Now, within the character of God, within his unchangeable, immutable, unalterable character, there is also the love of God. So, I mentioned it briefly before. The answer to pain and suffering isn't the Islamic answer that God is sovereign, but he's not necessarily good. For them, God is sovereign, but his goodness is subservient to his sovereignty. So that's where you come up, whatever the will of God is, whatever the will of Allah, God, whatever happens to you, it's his will, whether it's good or whether it's bad. Well, that isn't true of the Lord our God. He cannot do wickedly. Goodness is not subservient to his sovereignty. God cannot sin. So everything he does will be out of his character if he did. He will not do wickedly, but also he will not pervert justice. Everything that God does is just and will be just. So in other words, now we ask, what is Elijah contributing? He sees suffering as an instructional period, that God permits it. He wants to teach us, teach Job, teach us, teach everyone something. Now we already know that Job has done nothing. So we cannot buy into the idea, into the fact that he's suffering for what he had sown. He didn't sow anything. And we learned that where? At the very beginning, in the prologue, in the first 2 chapters. But let's ask the question. Since then, has Job sinned in the course of his suffering? In the course of the entire book. What kind of attitude has Job taken? Has it changed? Now he insists that he's innocent. He's been trying to justify himself. He's been digging his heels in. And I thought if you remember in high school when you studied Hamlet, you've got Ophelia, and she tells Hamlet, thou protest too much. Well, many of us also protest too much. We try to justify ourselves. I mentioned this last week. And so people come up and say, hey, look, enough already, Paul. It's the same thing I keep hearing from you all the time. You're just protesting. We're tired of hearing it. So it is with Job. He's going on and on and on, and he's protesting. Now, he's not wrong in protesting, and we are not wrong when we do. But he's wrong in the way that he is doing it, that he's going about it. We would be wrong in the way, maybe at how we end up protesting. Job is asserting his rights. He wants God, in fact, he expects God to answer him, to answer every one of his questions. And he goes beyond the limits that a believer in Christ should expect. Maybe sometimes we may go beyond the limits that we should. Now, in the course of his suffering, he's capable of saying some things that at the beginning maybe he wouldn't have said. So somehow his sinful character, which is inbred in him, in all of us, has come out. And that's something that we all have. It's our nature. It is our sinful nature. I believe Paul, to the Ephesians, he warned them in chapter 4, verse 26. And it is also in Psalm 4, verse 4. And again in Romans 7, verse 15. Any of these would fit in right here. And in order, Paul writes, be angry, do not sin, do not let the sun go down in your anger. The psalmist, be angry, do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. And then Paul writes about himself, which, if we read it, we're saying it about ourselves too. I don't understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do everything that I hate. You start off fine, but after a while, you end up doing and saying things that you would not have done at the beginning. So Job was capable of responses that he didn't think that he would have made. I believe all of us are. Most of us anyway. Suffering and pain can bring out something extra of ourselves. Now, chapter 32 has been, as some say, a rather long-winded introduction into why Elihu says what he's saying. In the first 17 verses, in part, but now hear my speech, O Job, listen to my words. Behold, I open my mouth. The tongue in my mouth speaks, my words declare the uprightness of my heart, and what my lips now know, they speak sincerely. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Answer me if you can. Set your words in order before me. Take your stand. Behold, I am toward God as you are. I too was pinched off from a piece of clay. Behold, no fear of me need terrify you. My pressure will not be heavy on you. Surely you have spoken in my ears, and I have heard the sound of your words. You say, I am pure, without transgression. I am clean, and there is no iniquity in me. Behold, he finds occasions against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks and watches all my paths. Behold, in this you are right. So I will answer you, for God is greater than man. Why do you contend against him, saying, he will answer none of man's words? For God speaks in one way and in two, though man does not perceive it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when the deep sleep falls on men while they slumber in their beds, when he opens the ears of men and terrifies them with warnings, that he may turn man aside from his deed and conceal pride from a man. And then it goes on. In chapter 36, verse 15, Elihu repeats what he says here in 33, verse 16. He delivers the afflicted by their affliction and opens their ear by adversity. So what's the point? What's he trying to say? You know, if you read the chapter, he takes a long time to say it. And he's just about as long-winded as the other three. But the point is that suffering can teach you things about yourself, what you're capable of, what you are really like. Now, there may be no connection with sin in Job's case, and his innocence is a valid point. But in the course of this trial that he's going through, the suffering and all the pain, that can bring things out in him. It brings things out in him, and it can bring things out in you. And you can say things that you didn't think that you were really capable of saying. I'm sure you all watched the hearings of the Senate Judiciary Committee when Judge Kavanaugh was being questioned. The treatment that he received, the brutal questioning that he went through, it was terrible. It was really, really bad. And then the following day, he came back and he was angry. You could see it in his face and in his character. Angry at all of the false accusations that they were making against him. Now, his reaction, was it really something that was expected of a judge that was to sit on the highest court of the land? These men are supposed to be very stoic, with showing no emotions, just reading the law and answering. Well, that's my point. Sometimes anger gets to you. You will say, think, and act ways that maybe are not expected of you. Well, as for Job, as for us, sin can rear its head in the course of any trial that we may be going through. Even though the sin or a sin was not the cause of the trial, of the suffering, of the pain, the effect of what you're going through. We know that when problems come, whatever they may be, we are all going to react. Sometimes we respond with an unjust anger. We sometimes respond with unjust accusations. I know that for a fact. We will even question at times God's goodness. We'll question his rights. We believe that we, doggone, have rights. We should be treated with a certain way. But the thing is, we all have a tendency to forget one thing. And right there, almost number one in the pile. We forget that we are his creatures. He molds, he shapes us as pleases him. Isaiah, in the 45th chapter, 9th verse. Woe to him who strives with him who formed him, a pot amongst earthen pots. Does the clay say to him who formed it, what are you making? Your work has no handles. How come I don't have any handles? Jesus in Caesarea Philippi, he said to his disciples to take up your cross, and follow him. But that's meaning to deny yourself, deny your status, your privileges, and so on. Follow him. He is your creator. Trials teach you. And whether you believe it or not, well, I'm sure you believe it because I think you've all heard it too. That saying, that so-and-so, he graduated from the school of hard knocks. What are they saying? They learn from life. Their ups and mostly their downs. Trials teach you. They bring lessons to you that maybe you otherwise may not have learned. Just think of a child that's raised by and I have to admit, I didn't know this term too much until recently, a few months ago. But children that are raised by helicopter parents. So when that child, when he or she goes out on their own and they come across trials and they find themselves in problems, they end up blaming somebody else. And usually we'll turn right around and blame the parents. You didn't teach me that. You didn't tell me this. And Mark, that reminds me of a song. And I forget who sang it. You know, Mama said there'd be days like this, there'd be days like this, my mama said. It was popular back in the 60s or 70s. Well, Hebrews 12, verses 4 through 7. It says that in your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the ones he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for your discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom the Father does not discipline? God isn't punishing you. He's not treating you as pawns for no reason. He's treating you as sons. He is disciplining you, for we are his children. You are born again. You are a new creation. You are a child of the living God. I know there's a term that everyone says, oh, well, we're all children of God, meaning the whole creation, all the humans. Well, in the sense that everyone has been created by God, yes, but not as a child of God. He is your Father, and he loves you, and that is why he disciplines you. You know, give it another name. Call it tough love. He doesn't love us as doting grandfathers or grandparents that have a habit of spoiling kids, because I don't think he has any grandkids. All of them. And I don't want to offend any grandparents here, me included. Well, Elijah is leading us to see God's mercy. Chapter 34, verses 16 to 25. If you have understanding, hear this. Listen to what I say. Shall one who hates justice govern? Will you condemn him who is righteous and mighty? Who says to a king, worthless one, and to nobles, wicked man? Who shows no partiality to princes, nor regards the rich more than the poor? For they are all the work of his hands. In a moment they die. At midnight the people are shaken and pass away, and the mighty are taken away by no human hand. For his eyes are on the ways of a man, and he sees all his steps. There is no gloom or deep darkness where evildoers may hide themselves. For God has no need to consider a man far further than he should go before God in judgment. He shatters the mighty without investigation and sets others in their place. Thus, knowing their works, he overturns them in the night, and they are crushed. And then it continues. So this is teaching more on the sovereignty and the power of God. So Elijah is suggesting that, yes, Job protests too much. He's trying to justify himself. And that we all do the same. And that's how really we're hardwired to do. I'll go as far as to say it's a natural thing with us. Elijah is saying that this trial is about teaching us. God is bringing us to date on what the heart is capable of. Do trials, situations do that? Do they sometimes break you down, make you feel as if you're utterly helpless? I mean, we're just a little speck of dust. I don't know if you can see dust unless it's accumulating. A little speck of dust in the universe, in the hands of a sovereign, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, almighty God. In chapter 36, with verse 26 and 28, behold, God is great, and we know him not. The number of his years is unsearchable. For he draws up the drops of water, they distill his mist and rain, which the skies pour down and drop on mankind abundantly. And it goes on for the rest of the chapter. It's like a lesson in meteorology. But here we learn again that God is sovereign. He is powerful. Now, Job believes this, and I'm sure we all believe this also. But sovereignty implies that we do not have the right to have all the answers. We asked last week, where do you find wisdom? Well, God is sovereign in granting knowledge to us. Going back to the meteorologist, they learned the science of forecasting the weather. And I think now they do a pretty good job. They can pinpoint the hour, the minute that a hurricane is going to hit land or someplace. Tornadoes. But that knowledge has been granted by God, as all the knowledge of science. How to calculate. Do you remember before calculators, we used slide rules in school? And with those little slide rules, they calculated the trajectory of a rocket and a capsule to be able to land on a particular spot on the moon, or to go into orbit and what speed. All of those things has been granted by God. But there are still things that cannot be understood. There are still things that cannot be fathomed. So as you read, you might like how Elijah makes his points. Maybe you don't. He's brash. He's full of himself, as some say. But he does teach us something. That pain, suffering, can serve to educate, to instruct us afresh as to who God is. of what life is. So last week, again, the question was wisdom. Where can you find it? Well, we answered that by saying that it is found by submitting to God. Submitting to Him. For as it is written in Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. He is sovereign, and we should submit to Him.